The premiere for Amazon Prime's House of David series finally delivers on what I've wanted from biblical fiction on the screen for decades. I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. The IMDb synopsis for House of David reads, "The once mighty King Saul falls victim to his own pride. As an outcast shepherd boy, David is anointed as the second king." I guess I won't read the descriptions for the first 3 episodes, which is what dropped as kind of the premiere. It basically takes us up to the anointing of David. And it looks like if you jump ahead, and especially with how the first episode starts, it's all leading up to the famous David and Goliath confrontation. Now, what am I not going to do? Let me be clear about that. I'm reviewing this, of course, from a Christian perspective. I am not going to put on my Christian nerd glasses and talk about like all the things that are different from the Bible and what they changed and what they should have done better and kept more like the Bible and stuff like that. I am confident there's going to be some content out there if you're looking for that. That sounds really tedious to me. And I'm not sure it's all that fruitful of a thing to point out, because that's clearly not the point of the show. At the beginning of every episode, they make a point of having white text on a black screen saying, while we are trying to be respectful of history and the biblical narrative, some license is taken here and there for the sake of storytelling. So there's going to be some differences. They let you know up front. If you get upset about the differences beyond that, it's your fault for continuing to watch after seeing that screen every single episode. So I'm not really interested in that whole debate. What is valid, I think, along those lines, is to look at broadly, how does this show characterize God? Does it, even if it changes up some factoids and things like that, is the net result one that characterizes God in a way that is consistent with the Bible? How does it characterize what it means to worship and obey God when we look at the Old Testament as a whole? Does it make me want to read the Bible? These, I think, are much more valuable questions to consider. Okay, so what does this thing basically feel like? It's a historical drama, I'd say, with spurts of action and sprinklings of the supernatural. And so in that sense, even though as Christians we believe these are actual events that took place in history, the supernatural elements give it just a touch of geek appeal if you're looking for something like that. I think I would compare it a little bit to Vikings, probably with fewer of those supernatural elements, but subtle in the same way, where it's kind of like editing and conservative visual effects are representing at least what characters are imagining they're experiencing and stuff like that. Although I think that this series is not implying that the supernatural things happening are all in the heads of the characters. I think it is saying this stuff is real and we're treating it as real, but it's kind of like the supernatural elements are very often invisible and experienced on a subjective level. So yeah, in some ways I would compare it to Vikings. Far less extravagant and frequent action scenes, but I think there's some appropriate comparisons to make there. It's very character oriented, which I, of course, really appreciate. I bring some knowledge of the characters with me, of course, but time is given to show what is driving all of the main characters, and basically takes details that we know from the biblical accounts and fleshes them out and saying, okay, well, we know this happened and this person behaved this way. What might have driven them to behave that way? How might those directly around them have reacted to them behaving this way? What kinds of things might they have thought about their behavior? So that's the kinds of things that's being fleshed out, and I really appreciate that. David is not without flaw. He's certainly maybe the most virtuous character, but he's not without flaw. Saul, certainly the villain of the story, but he is not devoid of relatability. The nuance and complexity of real humanity and the nuance and complexity of the biblical narratives about these characters really seems to be a priority in the writing. Not that all those details are represented as they are in the Bible, but the spirit of the fact that there's complexities here that are going on seems very much respected. And in a very early scene, man, I got the feels by something they added that I don't think you could find anywhere, any indication of in Scripture, where David is singing while remembering his mother. And I won't spoil exactly what they did that made it so moving to me, but it was clever and it was beautiful. So really just some neat things in the fleshing out of the biblical narratives here. Dialogue is delivered with what felt to me appropriate feeling accents. Of course, ancient Hebrew is different from Hebrew today, and so pronunciations, we don't know how Hebrew is pronounced, and therefore we don't know what the accents would sound like if they were speaking in English 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years ago. But they felt like, okay, it's that kind of Middle Eastern accent, cool. The writing of the dialogue also has a hint of the archaic, but does stay relaxed enough to keep the characters feeling relatable to a modern viewer without being too anachronistic for me. I feel like sometimes the writing in The Chosen, and I've only seen a little bit of The Chosen here and there, walking through the living room as my family's watching it. I'm going to wait till it's all done, and then I'll go back and watch it. But like there'll be some things here and there that just feel a little like modern, and I'm like, that doesn't feel like the way they should be talking. So, but that's a very subjective thing. This one felt like it was relaxed enough to be relatable, but still appropriately archaic and of another time. People have quirks and can be playful and joking with each other. So it's not like this stick up their butt kind of overly stiff representation of these people and these stories. And so I think that's very helpful to humanize them by giving them little quirks and letting them be playful when appropriate. Even knowing what the main beats are that are coming, the drama and the suspense builds for me because I see what these events mean to the characters. Like I said earlier, they're fleshing out emotional reactions that aren't necessarily found in Scripture, or if they are, you really have to piece things together and make some deductions. But you get a sense of what different well-known events from the biblical account, what these events cost people, what they mean to people, what hopes and fears drive them, and lead to those famous moments from the Bible. Each episode, as I said earlier, says up front, they're taking liberties for the sake of storytelling. They're mostly adding rather than subtracting. I think it's been maybe a couple years since I, read beginning to end the narrative of First Samuel, Second Samuel, the story. Actually, it's been longer than that. And my memory is bad. So, but I feel like when they are adding ideas, very often it's informed by the rest of the Old Testament. An idea stated in a psalm somewhere might be something that comes out of Samuel's mouth or out of the mouth of his wife or something like that. So they may be taking liberties, but the writers, I think, clearly know the Bible, and the script in the Bible is informing the script, the facts of the story, and the values and the significance behind the events of the story. This is not just a political family intrigue drama. It's brought to the surface multiple times that Israel rejected God's rule in favor of having a human king. And this is seen as like just a bad and tragic choice that Israel made as a nation. And this is the scenario that's playing out because of it, even though God is still at work and still bringing about good in the mess that Israel has chosen. Israel's king rejects God in favor of his own ambition. And so from the top down, corruption is spreading, in part personified by the gods of other nations being introduced and sorcerous practices and stuff, which are actually treated as dark and evil as opposed to just one of many options in today's relativistic society. So it's interesting, like the way that they treat kind of like the dark practices of other nations and the gods that they worship. It has like some vibes of Conan the Barbarian, of that kind of sword and sorcery vibe, where like if there is sorcery, it's treated as dark and evil, and so that's a vibe that I appreciate as someone who both like would see the value in that being brought out from the biblical narrative, and also as a geek who likes sword and sorcery with really dark, mystical stuff going on. The supernatural is subtle so far, with editing and visual effects portraying things happening on a spiritual level. Goliath and his people are given a bit of a mystique to them that feels just a little like fantasy, but their actual size, their use in the story so far doesn't seem to be getting crazy. They're keeping them, it seems like, at about the height that the Bible describes them being, which is not too much taller than the tallest recorded person in history, which was from the last 1 or 200 years, So I'm. It doesn't seem like ridiculous, like these 50-foot giants or something like that. I mean, they weren't 50 feet tall in the biblical narrative either. So. The first episode, like I said, starts at the field of battle with David and Goliath, and then it cuts away before the big moment, with the rest of the season jumping back to show us the lead up to that famous confrontation, which looks like is going to be the focus of episodes 7 and 8, presumably the last episodes of the season dropping in early April. As far as the cast goes, almost entirely, if not entirely, well, let's see, Stephen Lang might be he's probably the exception. Almost entirely Middle Eastern, or at least convincingly close enough. Actually, one actress I thought was Caucasian when I looked at her IMDb page. I was like, oh no, she's Jewish. She's Israeli. Interesting. So there are a few that like either are Caucasian or maybe look kind of Caucasian. But I mean, I can shrug, since Middle Easterners in 1000 BC probably look different than Middle Easterners today. Performances are much more important to me. But I do appreciate that casting nonetheless. I don't recall a single performance that took me out. Well, okay, one of Saul's daughters felt a bit like a spoiled modern teenager, just a little bit, but she has few scenes. And the rest, I wasn't thinking about actors making choices. I was pulled into the story and who these characters are. Michael Skander, if that's how you say his name, he plays David. He was apparently plucked off the ensemble of a Broadway show, and is a great new face that makes David relatable and easy to root for. And I love that he just doesn't have that kind of cookie cutter Hollywood leading man look to him. And he's got a nice voice, but, it doesn't sound like he's from Broadway in that sense, No, it's because it's just a nice, simple, subtle voice. Yeah, and I'm liking him so far as David. I don't think we've seen his emotional intensity ramp up like it will as some other events play out in future episodes. But for now, I'm like, I like this guy. He's likable, and I want to root for him. Ali Suleiman is great as the multifaceted King Saul, who is ambitious, insecure, haunted, raging, and also loves his wife and son to the limits that his severe sin and dysfunction will allow him. Ayelet Zurer, I'm probably mispronouncing her name. She played Lara L., Superman's mom. In Man of Steel. And she plays Saul's wife, the Queen, and is likewise one that I found myself both caring about and repelled by, because she gets into some dark stuff and facilitates a lot of dark stuff. Ethan Kai plays Jonathan, and man, he plays Jonathan as the lonely voice of reason and the only one loyal to Yahweh in his messed up family, and I already love him in such a bittersweet way as I look far ahead to what I know is coming. The internal struggle seen in his performance just endears me to him. Stephen Lang probably is the standout at this point. He plays the prophet Samuel, and he stole every scene that he was in for me. He usually plays these hardened or evil characters in movies, and he makes Samuel so sympathetic and admirable in both his intense strength, and man, there's some like intense, brutal strength. If you know the narrative, if you know Samuel's life and some of the stuff he does as a prophet, it's like, dang! And you see some of that. And so you see that in some scenes, but then also this soft vulnerability in others. As someone who both represents God and wrestles with God, his performance has such wonderful nuance and variation that feels very appropriate, given that it's really through Samuel that we see the most direct representations of God's character. Stunts and visuals. Well, the sets, the costumes all feel very solid to me. There's a few what I suspect are background replacements, but I'm not sure. There's some isolated instances of questionable CG, but it's not really leaning on CG. They're really trying to do everything practical, and I so appreciate that. Yeah, that means that they're not going to be quite as ambitious and have as much spectacle, but the stuff that they do, it feels more real, feels more like it's happening. The fight scenes have a touch of slow-mo style now and then, and they get away with some visceral blood splatter elements by only showing either a split second or cutting away at the last second but still having blood on a blade, or in one case, putting the sun behind the combatants to almost make them silhouettes so you can see this arc of blood spraying off of them, but it doesn't seem as extreme and potentially upsetting to people because it's almost just a black silhouette of blood, but neither does it feel sterilized. And so I think this is a really happy medium for a lot of their target audience, which, let's face it, is going to be among the more conservative and sensitive Christians. I'm a little surprised at how practical it felt while still having some stylish action here and there. So I really don't have any complaints about just the production, the level and quality of production visually as it presents itself overall. Okay, so themes. Is there anything of moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance going on in the themes of this thing that could trigger some worthwhile thought or conversation? Well, you might think that some kind of theme is going to be really obvious. Just look whatever's in the Bible, and that's what's going to be the theme in here. And not necessarily. God is given, in a way I really appreciate, what I think is the biblical complexity of being loving, caring, and holy, meaning other, absolutely elevated and other in a way we have no point of reference for, and therefore is not to be taken lightly. And that becomes very clear. But at the same time, this is a God who loves his people, who rescued his people, and mourns in some fashion that they've rejected him as God. I think you have to read between the lines to see all of those things, but God doesn't have a voice. There's not some James Earl Jones voice representing God. He is off-screen and silent and filtered through, known through the reactions from Samuel, the thoughts and musings of Samuel and other characters about God, about their interfacing, as it were, with God. And I prefer this to a more direct representation, especially in this story, because in the biblical narrative, he's not appearing in burning bushes and pillars of fire and stuff at this time in Israel's history. And so it seems very appropriate that he's an off-screen character, but that is still very present. I question David's motives a bit. I question them not in the sense of like, oh, I think he has bad motives, but like I don't really see them coming to the surface like I want to. He has a bit of some modern hero traits injected into him, where he's kind of like seeking to be independent, and he's not happy with just being a shepherd. He wants to fight in the battles, and there's some of that that's biblical, but like the way they lean into it, I'm like, I don't know. The idea that he's told by his mother, who kind of like had these visions apparently, that he is special. Of course that's what we want to hear as the hero in video games, that we're the chosen one, and that's what we like our heroes to be told in movies and stuff, because we like imagining ourselves as the chosen one with a special future and stuff like that. But I don't know if that's kind of like what was driving David. He clearly has some relationship with God in some brief prayers here and there. In some of his more extended, what we could assume is prayerful singing, he's singing in Hebrew. And so if you don't know Hebrew, then you're not really going to know, other than hearing Adonai now and then, you're not really going to know what it is that he's singing about, praying about, stuff like that. And so I want to see more about his prayer life, his relationship with Yahweh. I don't have the sense yet that he is a man after God's own heart. I don't have a sense of that really at all. He's got a prayer life, but is he really after God? I want to see that. I want to see how that drives him. Even in 1 Samuel 13:14, which is kind of an exchange that in the chronology of the show, we should have seen this kind of moment by now. Samuel says to Saul, "But now your kingdom shall not continue. Yahweh has sought out a man after his own heart." I don't think I heard that line from Samuel. I could be wrong. "And Yahweh has commanded him to be prince over his people, because you have not kept what Yahweh commanded you." And this is mentioned again in the book of Acts, that David was a man after God's own heart. Right now, David seems like a good guy, a humble guy who wants to do the right things, and who has some kind of prayer life. But man, I want to see... that's like I want him to be on a level that is way beyond me. I try to be a good guy, and I have a very regular prayer life, but I don't see this really unusual reverence, zeal, and personal love and devotion to Yahweh. I don't see in the script, in the scenes, this unusual sense, this unusual way in which David is a man after the heart of God. Oh my gosh. I'd love to see that. I can understand that's an intimidating thing to try and figure out, well, what did that look like in between the lines of Scripture? How do we flesh that out? I understand. Because I think as Christians, we're all trying to figure out, what does it look like to be a man or a woman after God's own heart? And different Christians have different ideas of what that looks like. So I get the challenge, but I still want something. I want them to take some direction with that and really go for it. And them doing that in some form that works for me, I think is going to be key, not to whether or not I enjoy this show or keep watching this show, but whether or not this show like hits a home run for me. But I think that could still very much happen. That could still very much be developed even in this first season. And I'm totally on board, at least for the rest of this season. All right, no idea what your tastes are in TV shows, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Peter, watch it. You guys have Amazon Prime anyway. Watch it. Holly and Asher, they're going to watch it with you. You'll all really enjoy it. It's finally some legit, well-made, mainstream standard quality biblical fiction on the screen. Yes, I think it's better made than what little I've seen of The Chosen. It's good on that level, and all the more meaningful and emotional because of what you bring to watching it as a Christian who recognizes David as the foreshadow of Israel's greatest and eternal King Jesus. Don't miss this. This one's rated 13 plus for violence, alcohol use, foul language. And those are all of my thoughts for now on the 3-episode premiere of House of David on Amazon Prime. As always, I'd love to get your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, click that bell to stay connected. I want to thank the Spirit Blade Insiders for making so much of my content possible. You can get info about the benefits of joining at patreon.com/Spirit Productions. Then I hope you'll check out our podcast and stay connected to all CGC content at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.